Just a little about our presenters, a little background on our presenters before we dive in. Stephanie Gutierrez, who I had the great pleasure of getting to spend a little time with during the North American Agroforestry Conference just a couple weeks ago, is the Forest and Community Program Director with EcoTrust. She leads projects related to forestry and national resource planning, education, and community outreach engagement. Her most recent work taps into her lived and professional experiences working alongside tribes and indigenous communities to apply their knowledge system frameworks to forest and natural resource planning while centering the community's values, needs, and goals. She's very busy. She's an enrolled member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. In 2020, she earned a sustainable forestry management Master's of Forestry degree from Oregon State University, and also holds degrees from Humboldt State University and Cal Poly. James as well, I also had the great pleasure of meeting during the North American Agroforestry Conference a couple weeks ago, is the Indigenous Lands Program Director with Trees, Water, People. Born and raised in New Mexico, James has immense experience working with tribes and understanding the traditional knowledge as it pertains to their unique values. After working with the government sector, James realized his heart belongs to the nonprofit world. In his current role, James provides much needed insight and experience on working with tribal governments that uphold traditional ethics of governance and leadership. His deep-rooted experiences and cultural values strengthen the program by building trust with tribes, promoting traditional landscape conservation values, and overseeing the development of community-based projects. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Stephanie first to kick us off.
There we go. I had to mute myself. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name, like mentioned before, I'm Stephanie Gutierrez. I'm San Carlos Apache, and I'm here to talk to you today about our Indigenous Agroforestry Network and how Indigenous land management intersects with agroforestry. And we'll go ahead and kick it off. And so I'll give like a short, like 15-ish minute presentation. I'll hand it off to James, and then we'll leave a lot of time for questions and some generative discussion as well. The flow of my portion of the talk, we'll talk a little bit about the Indigenous Agroforestry Network, the intersections of Indigenous land management and agroforestry, and then I'll share out some exciting upcoming events and opportunities to engage with us. So the Indigenous Agroforestry Network, it's funded by the USDA NEFA's American Rescue Plan program, and our funding began, I believe, in 2022 or 2023. And here are all of our project partners. They're wonderful. Many of our project partners are also some of the lead organizers for the network as well. And the goals of our network is to improve mutual understanding and cooperation between Indigenous agroforestry practitioners, tribes, and allied partners. And although we are Northwest-based, as we came to quickly realize, this is a growing movement, and it's really wanted and desired beyond the Northwest. And so we welcome collaboration across the U.S. You don't have to be Native to participate in the network either. And the network wants to build trust and relationships and good partnerships. And we offer events, programs, and workspaces for knowledge sharing and learning. Those are our goals, but like, what do we do? So we do original research, and I'll share a little bit about our research later in this presentation. But we also help support the integration of TEK, or Traditional Ecological Knowledge, and Indigenous land management practices into agroforestry, education, or other programs and services. We host events, and we really want to act as a resource and a connector for folks as well. So before we jump into like how Indigenous land management intersects with agroforestry, I think it's always really important to recognize first that Indigenous land stewardship and land management is holistic, it's integrated, and while rooted in thousands of years of experience and knowledge, this is it's a collective living knowledge system. It continues to grow and adapt and evolve with our current and will continue to evolve with our future generations as well. And many of these knowledge systems and these indigenous practices inform a lot of contemporary Western agroforestry systems of practice, or maybe not Western, but more broadly known agroforestry systems of practices too. When working with tribes, I think it's also really important to not acknowledge tribal histories, but also that tribes are sovereign and they are the governing bodies of their ancestral territories in many cases, resources, communities, people, and then also membership. I think it's also really important to acknowledge the impacts of colonial systems, including land dispossession and disruptions to our traditional practices. And as well, it increases some of those challenges related to access to our foods, fibers, and medicines, to practice our traditional ways, and also receive funding to support these practices. And so why agroforestry, like why align or explore the intersections of Indigenous land management and agroforestry? And really, I think that agroforestry as like a broader community has the potential to uplift customary gathering and management practices that support a lot of our life ways and cultural ways of being. And agroforestry also can help support climate and other environmental benefits, specifically like carbon sequestration, biodiversity, and just the overall health of our lands and waters. And Indigenous health and wellness of our communities is directly tied to the land. And we already kind of talked a little bit about what is agroforestry. So yes, grounding ourselves in how it's defined, the intentional integration of trees, or shrubs with crops or animal production to create environmental, economic, and social benefit. And so this is a photo of it's from a decadal report. It's called the Indian Forest Management Assessment Teams Report. And it's a decadal report issued by or mandated by Congress to provide an assessment of like the state of Indian forests across the US. And so the quotes that you're seeing to the left and the key messages, that's coming from a series of interviews with I believe it was over like 38 tribes that have forest land that were interviewed and participated in this assessment. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is like this link between forestry and agroforestry, especially for tribes that have forest land. On the right, you'll see commonly identified non-timber forest products. So in the forestry world, right, we say non-timber forest products, but actually in agroforestry, we're managing for a lot of those non-timber forest products, right? In Indigenous land management too, we're also managing for these multiple objectives, whether that be, for like salmon habitat, berry patches, love berries, it's berry season right now, fungi, culturally significant plants, animals, and fungi. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog whining in the background. And so some specific examples of Indigenous agroforestry or Indigenous land management and agroforestry and how they intersect here is, for example, the tending of huckleberry bushes in high elevation mountains in the Northwest, or harvesting cedar bark for regalia or other cultural purposes, and gathering roots too, digging and gathering roots. That's really important. And on the left of this slide, you'll notice that we have the 5 agroforestry practices that's defined by the USDA. But we also added fire. Fire is an incredibly important and culturally significant tool and element for many Indigenous people And fire is often integrated into how tribes or indigenous groups may engage in agroforestry too. And I already explained that. And then this is an example of just kind of like diving a little bit deeper into how, like a real world example of how indigenous folks are practicing agroforestry. So this is an example of using non-native animals, but also for integrating that management of hogs with or for a native plant species. And so that is restoring a legacy tan oak orchard. So the hogs that are being grazed in this orchard are actually cleaning up the leaf litter. It's reducing the fuel load, so it's reducing wildfire risk as well. And once they've cleaned up the understory, fire was also reintroduced back to this landscape. So they were able to burn on this land that you're seeing in the photos there. And what they noticed is that the tan oak acorns that dropped later, there was more abundance of them, and also that they just tasted better too. And so with the acorns tasted better, than when the hogs went back to graze all of like the unwanted acorns, even though they kind of know how to sniff out their good ones, the hogs ended up tasting better as well. And then so they are processed as well. And so it's just, that integration and management for multiple objectives that you're seeing there. And I wanted to highlight, I'm not going to go too much into detail because we don't have so much time together today, but we do have a survey report that is out, and I can drop the link in the chat later. It's also, if you scan the QR code that you'll see at the end of this presentation, it'll take you to our link tree, which has this report, but it shows what types of agroforestry practices that our survey participants. We had over 190 participants for this survey, over 80 tribes represented, and so there's a diversity, at least among the Northwest. We did have folks outside of the Northwest participate, but a diversity of folks in the Northwest. You could see like what their level of awareness and interest is in agroforestry systems and practices. And some ways to engage with the network. We have our annual gathering. It's the second one. Last year we launched our first Indigenous Agroforestry Network gathering. That's where the photo on the left is. We're hosted by the Blue Lake Rancheria, Wiyot Tribe, Karuk Tribe, and Hoopa Valley Tribe in Northern California. And next week, although in-person registration's closed, there is still a virtual option available. And I will drop the link to register in the chat once I'm done. It is sliding scale. So there is a community access $0 option too, if you're interested. We do have a tech and tools survey that will be presented at our next webinar, which is also September 17th. And so this tech and tool survey explores what types of tools or technology and other information is desired by tribal natural resource professionals to manage or to engage in agroforestry and also forest stewardship. So it's not just agroforestry too. There is a broader lens looking at forestry as well. And here's the QR code. So go ahead, take out your phones and scan it if you'd like. That'll take you to the link tree. I'll also drop the bit.ly link in the chat once we're done. But ways to be connected, you could attend our virtual gathering next week. You can join us for our next webinar, which is September 17th. You can also follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to James, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. And yes, James, please take it away.
Sweet. Thanks, Stephanie. Let me just get ready and pull up my slides. All right. Can you all see my slides? Cool. All right. Thanks, y'all. Well, yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks Bree and the group for welcoming me and staff to come and talk with you all a little bit about Indigenous agroforestry and some of the cool work we're doing across, the country. My name is James Calabaza. I am a citizen of Santo Domingo Pueblo, which is located in north central New Mexico, but I work for a Colorado-based nonprofit called Trees, Water, and People. And I do want to apologize ahead of time. I'm dealing with like a sore throat, so if I'm coughing, it's just because I'm trying to get the symptoms out of it. So I apologize in advance. But today, I wanted to walk you all through a project that our organization partnered on with several other entities two years ago called the Southwestern Tribal Agroforestry Outreach Project. We really looked at how can we elevate and amplify indigenous practices of agroforestry through the means of storytelling. For a lot of indigenous and tribal communities, here in the United States, but also globally, are very orally based. So they pass oral knowledge, histories, practices, methodologies, etc., through the concept of storytelling from generation to generation. So we work with several communities and case study participants to really look at how agroforestry is being practiced within the greater American Southwest. And when we talk about the greater American Southwest, we're looking at the states of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. So our main footprint of the project was within those specific four states, but we only had three entities from three states participate in our project. I just first wanted to open up and give a land and knowledge acknowledgement that the American Southwest is ancestral and present day homelands for many tribal indigenous communities, from the Tewa, Toa, Tiwa, Keres, Pueblo, and Apaches, and many other tribes that are still actively within these communities and landscape today, that there's a long history of their presence and land stewardship that's still deeply embedded into today's practices of not just agroforestry but stewardship and conservation based work. And we recognize that these people have lived sustainably in the Southwest since time immemorial, which only makes it much more imperative to recognize their contributions of how we can learn to really coexist or rekindle that relationship back with the landscape ourselves. Just some project background of our tribal agroforestry outreach project is that we were really looking to promote and revitalize those traditional agroforestry projects or practices, excuse me, within tribes in the Southwest through the concept of storytelling, being active listeners, funneling and channeling resources to these communities to really allow them to increase or amplify their efficiencies on if they were producers, if they were farmers, if they were enterprise businesses. That was really one of the big components of what we wanted to accomplish within this project. The second one was we really wanted to work in conjunction with those producers and community members to revitalize and reintroduce traditional agroforestry practices. There's been it's unfortunate there's been a big gap and loss of these practices or knowledge and wisdom from generation to generation due to the presence and integration of Western based like education, concepts, systems, etc. So for a lot of these tribal indigenous communities in the Southwest, they really wanted to reconnect and revitalize the connection between their practices of agrarian and agroforestry practices to the next generation. And one way they wanted to do so was through active storytelling and by combining it with today's means of video, photography, interviews, etc., etc. So giving a little bit of overall background of what our project focused on. Here are our project partners that we were fortunate enough to work with: USDA National Agroforestry Center, Northern Arizona University School of Forestry, the Quivira Coalition that's located here in New Mexico, and then the Southwest Agroforestry Action Network that, really focuses on those 4 states that I mentioned earlier about, how to integrate and support producers, operations, regarding agroforestry, silvo pasture, row cropping, et cetera, et cetera. We had 3 main key deliverables that we wanted to, end our project with. The first one was to have some videos and info sheets that really highlighted these tribally led agroforestry initiatives in the Southwest. We had 3 awesome case study participants that worked with us and partnered with us on the project. The first one was the Santa Ana Pueblo Native Plant Nursery. Second group was the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute in Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. And then the third one was a Tewa Women United nonprofit entity in Arizona. Our second deliverable was looking at how do we create a synthesis or literature review that highlights the key findings, the key takeaways, the nuggets of knowledge that we were able to ethically take and highlight within a synthesis report from the conversations we had with these communities. We learned so much about the importance of indigenous data sovereignty, the importance of keeping people's identity protected, their knowledge systems protected through this process. So we were able to create a synthesis as part of one of our deliverables that is available on a website that I'll pull up here in a bit to show you all so you can access it. And then our third deliverable was participating in webinars, podcasts, presentations like this to really amplify and extend what we learned from our project, specifically of indigenous practices of agroforestry into the Southwest, so that more people can understand and see the deep connection of how these peoples and communities have, been active agroforesters within this landscape way before agroforestry even became a term or a concept within the government or academic and research systems. So why did we choose to work, and focus on tribal agroforestry in the Southwest? Well, first off, it's a very large land base. I think combined between Arizona and New Mexico itself, it's like millions of acres of, land, like semi-arid to desert landscape, high altitude landscape areas, but also the Southwest encompasses a high percentage of tribal nations that own land and have been that own land in which they have been practicing agroforestry since time immemorial. So we decided to really invest our time, our resources, and our energy in working with communities in this landscape. We know that the Southwest is a very unique and magical landscape that people have learned to fight colonialism, have learned to survive genocide, have learned to really deal with the environmental changes over hundreds and thousands of years. So we realized that this place could really provide a lot of merit to the world of agroforestry in regards to how they're implementing and practicing it today. That goes to the concept of how do we elevate traditional ecological knowledge through these communities of, through active storytelling, being active listeners, and then writing down, concepts and wisdom points that could really benefit, the overall sector in terms of reconnecting that, the concept of people to the landscape and everything holistically. I know Stephanie and Bree and everyone else has already Kit, excuse me, have already kind of highlighted that agroforestry is really embedded to and connected to so many different systems, and that's really indigenous knowledge as well, is that agroforestry is just one of many things within a larger holistic ecosystem. So when we talk about, agroforestry in the Southwest, we also have to recognize the colonization that has taken place. We have to recognize the racism, the pollution, land degradation, historically and present day and into the future, because we're losing land, we're losing resources. Water is a very, very special resource in the Southwest, especially like right now, we haven't had rain in like over a month. So, it's becoming very political, but we're trying to keep ourselves grounded to like learn from our tribal partners and community members regarding how do we maintain, optimism and, maintain some grounding to, really think positively over, the next coming years. But we also have to, recognize that agroforestry is very diverse practice, is practiced very diversely. We look at, row cropping, civil pasture, we look at, enterprises and business markets. And so that is something we wanted to really bring into our project. For example, fiber is a big thing for the Navajo Nation in the Southwest. Their practice of raising sheep and flocks, really talk about their management of invasive species within the American Southwest. So I was really interested to hear how the utilization of grazing to control invasive species has really withheld the changes of ecosystem changes and degradation, but promoting, a more native approached environment within this larger landscape. And then just kind of looking at the connectivity here that, products beyond financial is, deeply connected back to the interconnected, ness of food, field, building, tools, hunting, ceremony, education. Those are all big components that were brought up during our project, during the interviews and conversations we had with producers and community members, is that you can't just look at agroforestry as one component to a certain market or for a certain product. It has to incorporate all these other components, which makes this kind of this practice very, very special. As through our project, through our 2-year project, we realized that braiding together partnerships was an important thing we were focusing on. We wanted to build those relationships, on tribal lands with both the community members, leadership, but as well as other entities that are non-tribal but working within the community. We wanted to elevate those indigenous perspectives and voices. They carry hundreds, if not thousands of years of knowledge that is not recorded in a history book or is not recorded in a recorded audio tape. It's they carry it within themselves. So we really wanted to take an ethical approach in how can we learn from them and utilize their knowledge that they've gained from their ancestors to really live in harmony with the landscape. Looking at collaboration and ownership, going back to my point of indigenous data sovereignty, is that the data that we collected, video, testimonials, everything belongs to these people and these communities. So we had to go through a process of learning the kind of the governmental and the system functionality of transferring data ownership from one point to the other. And then lastly, storytelling within digital media. An elder once told us, storytelling is something that's big within their community, but to combine it with today's practices of capturing it on video is like honoring the old ways with the new ways. That was a really unique way of kind of taking it in, is like they wanted to share to the world what they know about agroforestry and land stewardship by combining it with today's technology of storytelling and capturing this through a storytelling measure. And then I'm not sure how much time we have, Bree, but I wanted to quickly show like a 5-ish minute video, if that's okay for folks to kind of get an idea.
I think we have time for that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then also just to kind of give folks, this kind of this landing page of where they can find our resources from the project. So the Quivira Coalition .org/agroforestry is where you will find all of our project resources, materials, our synthesis report, etc. You just have to scroll down to the bottom. There's a lot of great information here. I highly encourage you all to check it out. We got our project actually highlighted in the Green Fire Times, which covers the American Southwest. And then here is where our synthesis report is located that we put together for our project. It really illustrates and highlights some of the important things that we learn and value through this project. But I'll let you all get to this and like take a look at it. It's available digitally for you can download it and then share it amongst your partners as well. But I wanted to quickly just show this video that we produced with one of our partners, the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute, talking about a food forest in north central New Mexico.
I wonder what it will look like in 100 years. I wonder what it'll look like in 200 years. If I put the ingredients in place now, can I get it to be a life source in 200 years? Can it still be feeding birds? Can it still be producing fruits and vegetables maybe? Can it still be a place that life is happening instead of what us people often do is destroy an area. We come in and we clear cut or we drive over the life force, we deaden it. How can we reverse that and make it so that it continues to be enriched instead of depleted? Yeah, Kingi. Na ojegi poviki joahawe from Kapo Winge. I am Roxanne Swensel from the Pueblo of Santa Clara, and we are here on my people's ancestral homelands. 1989, I was part of co-founding a nonprofit institute called Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute. And we started it here in my house, here at Santa Clara, Pueblo. And the idea at that time was to follow the thinking of permaculture practices, of living in a sustainable way and practicing living together according to how nature puts things together. What we started with. And I mean, now we're getting more into the organic matter, but it's basically sand. It has very little life force in it. And so we were wanting to like start planting things in this kind of environment. Pretty harsh, pretty hot, pretty cold, pretty windy. Not very nice for any life. And what we had here was a driveway that had been very abused and driven over for a long time. And we wanted to bring it back to what it could be by way of a life-producing, beautiful, natural environment. So first thing we did here was we went and got what we could find, which was rocks. The rocks were free. We didn't have any money, so we dragged some boulders off the side of the road and put them in this deserted driveway, and that became home base. You know, it could be a rock this big or it could be a rock this big. It didn't matter. It was like somewhere it started. And once you have that rock there, then you have like the back side of the rock, and you have the front side of the rock, and the east side and the west side of the rock. And now you have a whole environment that can begin. Here's the first rock. The sun comes up this way, goes over and goes down this way. So as a microclimate, and you're using this, for instance, a rock, as a microclimate, you're like getting the sun coming up over here. If you have planted a nice little plant back here, it gets morning sun. It's warm. It's warming up this rock. So it's getting thermal mass to warm it. It's catching runoff water, seeping underneath all around the rock to make this area more wet around the rock. It doesn't let that moisture evaporate because the rock is stopping the evaporation. Afternoon sun is really hot here. So it's hitting this rock, making it super warm, but it's shady on this side. So that little plant is going to be much more comfortable back here in the shade, but in the night, the heat from this rock is going to radiate and keep it warm here. So it's going to get a little longer season just because this rock is here. I mean, so many things that can happen around this rock. But the rock was the first place we started this area that now you can see is a forest. But it all basically started having this rock here. And no one would have known that this rock was the nucleus of this whole area of life happening.
Okay, I would love to show you all the rest of the video, but I know we're strapped on time. But I encourage you all to go to the quiviracoalition.org/agroforestry webpage, where you can find and access, other videos and resources part of our project, and really show see the true testament of what Indigenous agroforestry means to a lot of these community producers, individual producers, but also tribal enterprises as well. So just quickly wanted to go through, we were fortunate enough to work with Roxanne Swensel, who's the executive director and one of the co-founders of Flower and Tree Permaculture Institute. Their operation focused on forest farming, windbreaks, and a civil pasture concept farm, because they were also grazing pigs and sheep under the forest floor to kind of control the invasives, but also help the animals help tilled up the soils, as she said, to bring back organic matter. So that was something that her people up in Santa Clara Pueblo have been doing for hundreds of years, is utilizing livestock onto the landscape to help revitalize the topsoil for agrarian and crop production use. Just some photos here of some of the vegetation that, is present at their forest farm. It's really cool in that area, especially in a very arid ecosystem where temperatures can get to the triple digits. Her place, I think average is about somewhere in the high 70s to the mid 80s. So it's constantly cool, allowing for a really great ecosystem to thrive. Our second case study participant was Santa Ana Nursery, which is more of an enterprise business owned by the Santa Ana Pueblo. They produce, plant materials, specifically native plant materials for restoration and reclamation projects for tribes across the greater Southwest. So they were shipping, products all the way even to California and even to the Midwest to do, restoration projects that focused on traditional practices of agroforestry and stewardship land management initiatives. And there's, again, just some more photos of their operation. And then our last case study participant was the Taiwan Women United group. They are a women and gender advocacy focused initiative where they worked on environmental justice, healing justice, land and culturalization, and food and seed sovereignty. They have a healing foods oasis garden up in Espanola, New Mexico, where they work with the city and the county and local residents to really bring forth the initiative to heal one another through times of, the pain. Like COVID was a big time that they worked and came together, but also recognizing that environmental and reproductive justice was needed in communities like Espanola. So they really focused on that concept of it. Just to quickly wrap up, some highlights and lessons learned were that, Traditional ecological knowledge and, agroforestry is wider than the conventional practices of what we can see or read about in a textbook. Yet they encompass them. They are implement or integrated within the larger focus of it, but agroforestry should not just be about, the civil pasture work, the permaculture, the row cropping. You have to look at the other values of, environmental justice, colonialism, future desired conditions of the landscape, etc. Diversity in practices and diversity of outcomes is something that is needed for the production and ceremonial use and self and community guidance that really produce the culturally important products, something that these communities have ownership of, that they pride themselves of, but also, really are heavily embedded and invested into the day-to-day work of it. And then lastly, I keep emphasizing this, but when working with tribal and indigenous communities, if it's agroforestry or not, data sovereignty is a very big component. It's the importance of working in right relationships, equitable relationships with these communities, because these are knowledge systems that they are willing to share, freely, I would say, unless, you provide compensation or you provide honorariums, which I highly encourage you all, if you want to work with the tribe, is considering, to budget in honorariums and stipends for indigenous participants. But data sovereignty, protection, utilization, and sharing is something that is very valuable and important to consider when working with these indigenous and tribal communities. But yeah, just some tribal processes. It took us a while to get our final synthesis report all ready to go and publish, just because of multiple reviews of feedback by tribal leaders. When we're talking about presidents, chairmen, but also cultural leaders. But I think that really allowed us to understand and learn the importance of working with these sovereign communities is that it takes time. You got to have flexibility, but it also fosters those honest long-term relationships. We're still working with the same communities and the same institutions today on much larger long-term projects. So this was kind of the catalyzing opportunity to open up many doors for us to scale up agroforestry initiatives in the American Southwest. But with that, I think that is all I have. So thank you all so much. And I'm sorry I took a little bit longer, but I'm hoping that you all can go and check out those videos. They're well produced and directed. But thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you for that, James. They do look really awesome. I dropped the link in the chat. So, and please feel free if there are other links or such like that, more specific link you'd like to share. Please feel free to drop that in as well. So at this stage, I'll open the floor for questions. If anyone would like to put questions into the chat or come off of mute and speak their questions for any questions you have for James or Stephanie, I'll pause here for that. Otherwise, if nothing immediately while folks are thinking, but we do have something from Bethany here. Hi, Stephanie and James. Thank you for your presentation. Especially appreciate you sharing your framework for covering and amplifying the Indigenous land management wisdom. While African Americans have a different story in the U.S. than Indigenous folks, we also experience a loss and disconnection from the ecological knowledge of our ancestors. What recommendations do you have for how families and land stewards might approach recovering and then preserving our land use stories and expertise?
I could try. I mean, I think I'm thinking, I'm drawing from my own experience, which we all have different experiences here in this room. For me, I really like on a personal level, what I've started to do is to ask my family to if they'd be interested in interviewing. And that's even like my mom and my dad, and I hold both Indigenous and settler identities. My dad's white, my mom's Apache. And so I think acknowledging like both of those identities within my family and interviewing them and documenting them, and like the question specifically why I'm interviewing my family is I want to learn about our different connections to the land and plants. And that even includes like my dad's side of the family too. So that's what I'm just starting, or that's what I would suggest, is just start having conversations. And there is gaps in my family, like missing information because of that disconnection from traditional practices for Apache people. And there's some people in my family who won't even talk about Apache lifeways. So I think just because I am Indigenous doesn't mean like I have all this knowledge just by being born Native, right? It is a responsibility, and I have to be accountable to my community and show up and learn every day. And so with the gaps in knowledge, I think it's just trying to also like see what other people are doing, learn from other people who are outside of my family, and try, I felt, I think at some point on a personal level, just like some like shame or guilt around not being able to know immediately, like how to weave, for example, or what materials go into basket weaving. Um, and some of my family didn't either. And so I had to go ask outside of my family. And so piecing together and beginning, right, those traditions that continue to evolve and adapt. Like we're just as worthy. We are whole people. And so maybe I don't use the right kind of willow, or maybe I don't use like pitch for my basketry, but I also live in the Northwest too. So that's another complex layer of identity. But yeah, that's my sharing. I don't know. James, do you want to share or add anything?
Yeah, happy to. And thanks for the question, Bethany. I know, some of my good friends who are, African American, we've had some long conversations about just the, disconnection and loss of cultural values and over time, for I think both of our communities. And I think one of the ways that my community and my family specifically have found ways to reconnect and rekindle those, the wisdom and the knowledge is, similar to what Stephanie said, is just my family being open to like talk about it and like record it. I know in the past my family would be like a little hesitant to share knowledge where it could be recorded, but now I think they understand it's really the best utilization or best tool of like preserving that knowledge, especially as our younger generation is very technologically advanced and today, to where we got to look at how do we solve today's challenges with creating with finding solutions for tomorrow's needs. And that's like, how do we bring in technology? And that's what we found really, really instrumental in our project, was that people were really open to like being interviewed and having their knowledge being captured within video, because then it can be preserved in a repository or in a place that people can access. But another way that my family and like other families in my community have really been able to keep some of the knowledge system is that by participating in community events and just having like community like discussions or like small focus group discussions, just to be like, how did your, like, say your great grandpa or grandma, how did they plant corn, how did they cultivate the land? Like, I think that has helped kind of strengthen the cross-cultural sharing of different farming techniques, of stewardship techniques, but also looking at resource availability too. Like, not everyone in my community has like a tractor or has, heavy equipment that they can utilize. So there's still like a way to like still connect and collaborate. And it seems to be something that is pretty commonly used in New Mexico and Arizona with, not just indigenous communities, but Hispanic communities as well, that people come together, either on the weekends or throughout the week, just to have those conversations about like, best practices of like shared stewardship, or like what were things that, that were done in the past that can be utilized today. So those would be my recommendations. And honestly, like, it's it's hard to justify and get people to be comfortable to speak freely about their knowledge and their wisdom on camera. Like that was one of our biggest challenges. But when bringing up the concept that this could be preserved and useful for another like 200 years from now, like I think they get it that way. So I would just say like more conversation and more cross-cultural sharing will be the best way forward.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you.
So appreciate that. I haven't seen any other questions populate, but that doesn't mean you all don't have any. So please feel free to come off mute or throw them in the chat. In the meantime, while we're still collecting, I know, Stephanie, you had mentioned your survey report, and I was interested in just hearing, in terms of findings from that, any things that were shocking to you, as it related to, how people engage with agroforestry already, or maybe the turnout of folks that showed up in the space to answer these questions, or just any takeaways from that you'd care to share. I know you didn't dive much into it, but.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think one of the biggest like demographic takeaways from it was that it was most of our survey participants were under 40, so relatively young, and they were primarily Native women, which for me tracks because like in most I think in most I guess different across many tribes, women are the ones who are out gathering like cultural materials, basketry materials. We're we're taking our families out to tend to berry patches, or there's, I think this, we're knowledge bearers for different plants and fibers and medicines. So I think that was a correlation that I was just making. We didn't like ask them specifically why they were interested in gathering, but that's like an anecdotal, I guess, like observation that I had. And the level of interest, specific agroforestry practices that were of most interest were forest farming and riparian buffers and fire. And so one of the things that was noted was that riparian buffers and fire transcend a lot of different fields. So it could also be that those were what they were most familiar with. So that's what they're most interested in. But also I know like in the Northwest, we're definitely concerned about fire risk, and also increasing the health of salmon habitat for our rivers, which riparian buffers actively do.
Very cool. Thank you for that.
And then Bree, I'll just add to you real quick. I'm glad Stephanie brought up the concept of fire because, in traditional or contemporary practice of like agroforestry today, like fires, hardly ever mentioned or brought up as a practice or as a tool for land regeneration or stewardship. But that was one of the things we also learned from our project was that a lot of the ecosystems in, the Southwest are fire adapted, meaning that like fire has always been present there, but at much less severity than they are like today that we hear on the news. And so they were like looking at how can they really bring back fire into these complex systems and for agroforestry and utilize that as a way to kind of rejuvenate the landscape for, mostly for livestock livestock production, like forage production, excuse me. And so that was just something I think agroforestry needs to really incorporate more into conversation, is the idea of fire. Because for a lot of these communities, tribal indigenous communities, like fire is an important component to their cultural heritage. It grounds us. We have songs, we have creation stories, we have certain ways of connecting to it. And I'm assuming that there are probably other cultures in the world similar to that. And so I always challenge the today's kind of general agroforestry work is like, how can we bring in fire? Like that's a very important component that is missing to the practice of it entirely.
No, I appreciate that for sure. I definitely feel like fire is a very, no pun intended, but hot button conversation at the moment in our region as well. It's how to manage, use it to just manage your property best, and being careful about wildfire season and what to know about how to manage when those things come up. So I really appreciate that as well. Yeah, definitely should be more in the conversation. Well, if no one else has any questions or thoughts for our presenters today, I will say thank you so much, Stephanie and James, for being here with us today and sharing so much awesome knowledge. Appreciate you both as presenters and people. And if you all have also appreciated the presentation today, please take a moment and fill out our survey. We use this feedback to create additional educational opportunities and really tailor them to the things you all suggest. So we appreciate that feedback. Thank you all for being in attendance. And one other thing I will share is please join us next time. Please join us next time for our final installment of our Agroforestry Summer Seminar Series, where we'll be discussing agroforestry in the Farm Bill, discussing policy that can help inform agroforestry practices on a federal level. So that'll also be in the follow-up email, again, with the link to our survey. And again, thank you so much, Stephanie and James.
I had one quick question, if you guys don't mind. I'm sorry.
Caught me just in time, but go ahead. Yes.
I live in California and our property is in Mississippi and Texas. And yes, fire is a huge concern, especially in Texas. But what I'm looking at as well is the element of water. In Mississippi, there's approximately 160 acres with on 1/3 of the property, there's about possibly 4, maybe even 5 spring-fed ponds, of which fish are in, there's waterfowl, etc. What are some of the comments that you guys got from making sure that those animals, those fish, and the shrubs that were indigenous were a little bit more protected while being productive on the property?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's it's something that I forgot to bring up, as part of my presentation too, was that when we were working with these communities and like understanding the use of agroforestry, beyond just like, production and markets, they were also implementing agroforestry and permaculture practices for like wildlife habitat, and specifically for migratory birds, birds that were like either classified threatened or endangered on the, what's it called? Would it be U.S. Fish and Wildlife Species List? So that was a really cool concept or phenomenon that they were mentioning, is that they were monitoring certain migratory birds that will come, from the north, south, and over a 3-year time frame, they would see, a diverse set of bird species stop as a place to like nest up or rest or whatever, and then just keep moving on that way. So they really increase their production of agroforestry around more wetland and riparian zones, so that way it can keep accommodating for that migratory season when birds do move, north to south and south to north, because of those observations. And so, and just living or doing work in the desert arid Southwest, like the more riparian and wetland areas can, be protected and maintain water or moisture, I think people are really recognizing that native vegetation needs to be replanted, such as willows, conwoods. We do have a big problem of like tamarisk, Russian olive, and other exotics and invasives in our region. but surprisingly as well, like a lot of those exotics, birds do love them for habitat too. So it's always a question of like, do we want to like remove them? But birds love them, even though they're sucking up a lot of the water. So it's really comes to like the landowner's decision, but most landowners that we know of are, really removing the invasives and replanting like a lot of the willows, conwoods back into the area to maintain the riparian systems of water functionality and water availability. But the idea of utilizing like agroforestry and permaculture practices as a way to build and sustain wildlife and avian habitat was a cool thought that I didn't even think of until one of our partnering producing communities, really highlighted that was their main objective.
Very cool. And thank you for that question, sir. All right. And with that, I will thank you all once again for joining us.